Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.
I would like to start with certain questions which became and are becoming much more popular continuously. Also received certain significant public attention. And one of the questions that is quite ambiguous is, can machines or computers think? It's ambiguous because by thinking we mean many different mental states. And this is how certain philosophers and people working in the field try to disambiguate this idea. But more importantly, I think, the question is whether machines or computers can have consciousness and free will. Because consider the possibility, I mean, very, very much popular today in Hollywood movies, whether machines can take power and become a threat for humanity. How could it be possible? I mean, if you consider that the computers are running certain programs based on certain algorithms, which is written to do that and not to do that. But current developments show that machines can learn and change certain aspects of their knowledge process in code. I mean, whether it's possible to change the basic algorithm, whether a machine can change its basic algorithm. I mean, not the details, not the currently algorithms of learning, the basics of what regulates all these learning, etc. And here it seems that we must postulate another level of thinking, which is thinking about thinking, that may consider all the ways of thinking and choose between them or change between them, and that may require what we call free will. And now the key element here is consciousness. And I am happy that the earlier presenters quite emphasized this and gave some background for my presentation. And as they emphasized, there is a huge debate now about consciousness. What is consciousness? I mean, in terms of whether consciousness can be explained in terms of physical properties, calculation, or not. There seems to be an apparent gap between computers and consciousness, or physical states and conscious mental state. But the real question is whether this gap can be bridgeable, can be bridged or not. And here, two important channels of intellectual position appear. And in accordance with these two different positions, I will not take a definite position in my presentation. I will not assume which one is true, but try to analyze to what extent or what conclusions can we derive from these two different positions if we consider two important ontologies presented in the Islamic tradition. And these two ontologies are basically the dualist ontology, substance dualism, and kalam atomism, which is basically a materialist ontology. And I will analyze these questions in terms of two types of possibilities, because when we mean it is possible or is it possible, this is also again a kind of ambiguous question, because what we mean by possibility, what types of possibility in question is. Philosophers make a distinction between different types of possibility, but what is relevant here is, I think, the logical, metaphysical possibility on the one hand, and natural possibility on the other hand. And usually people define logical possibility in terms of states that do not are not in conflict with logical laws, like principle of non-contradiction. And when we talk about natural possibility, we are talking about states that are not in conflict with certain laws of nature, or what we take for granted as the basic laws of nature postulated by the best physical or biological law theories today. Now, I would like to give some important distinctions which have been emphasized, but just a quick summary. John Searle talks about strong artificial intelligence and weak artificial intelligence. In a weaker form, a computer can simulate but cannot duplicate a human mind. So it is not the exact human mind when we are talking about certain thinking functions or mental functions of a computer. It is not a real mental function when we talk about humans' mental properties. But the strong IA holds that the human brain is like a digital computer and the mind is like a computer program. There is no categorical difference between these. And he gives the famous Chinese room argument, which was emphasized by David in the first talk. I don't want to lose time here. You are already familiar with this, but the basic idea is syntax is not sufficient for semantics. That means what the program of the computer program operates is a kind of rule governing symbol manipulation, which is called algorithm or heuristic by the computer scientist. And all the outputs are regulated by these operations. And these processes, which we call the computations, are not sufficient to explain what is going on in human mind. And earlier it is emphasized that there is the kind of intentionality here, etc., that is missing in the computation. But also, Searle emphasized consciousness. Whether intentionality implies consciousness or not is another debate. But the big problem is whether consciousness is reducible to computation or not. And also another important distinction in the literature is made by David Chalmers. When he talks about the mental phenomena, he talks about first the easy problem. It is the task of explaining the ability to discriminate, categorize, react to stimuli, integrate information, etc. These kind of activities. And he thinks it is not so difficult to explain these mental phenomena in terms of computational properties. But there is a harder problem, which he calls the hard problem. It is explaining consciousness. Because consciousness is something quite peculiar, apparently, and it's also emphasized by many philosophers before. I mean, Thomas Nagel has a paper on it is like to be a bat. What is like to be a bat? It is something like to be a that organism. Seems to be unique and subjective, cannot be described by third-person properties. How is it possible? Or can we bridge this explanatory gap between consciousness and physical states? And Chalmers, indeed, I think, suggests such a scientific research program to do that. He doesn't think it is not unbridgeable. But now we have two options in front of us. The first option claims that the consciousness and the human mental properties cannot be reduced to physical properties or cannot be explained by calculation. The second option, it can be reduced and explained by calculation. So in the first option, there is a category gap that cannot be breached. In the second option, there is no category gap, and in time, as our knowledge improves and increases, we can see that these are not two different categories. Now, given that, I would like to introduce the two important ontologies that were proposed in the Islamic tradition. I mean, there are more ontologies we can talk about, but these are, I think, the more popular, significant among the Muslims in the history. The first one, we can call it a kind of substantial dualism, famously proposed by Ibn Sina, his flying man argument. Here, the human soul, especially the part which is called the rational soul, is considered to be separate from the human body and can survive after that. In the atomist tradition, there is no such a separate substance like the human soul or spirit or mind, whatever you call it. It is not a separate substance. There are only one type of substances which are constituted of indivisible particles, like they are called juzlayet, ejza, or jawhar atoms, and their combination give rise to bodies. And what we call the mental properties are accidents of these material substances. Or when we come to the idea of free will, the Maturidid school in Kalam consider it a kind of different type of accident, if you consider it accident. It's emri itibari, but these details are not so much important now. For those who are not familiar with these traditions, I would like to say think about the terminology I'm using here. Falasife, as it is called in Arabic, refers to a certain philosophical tradition in the Islamic history, which follows basically the ancient Greek wisdom. I mean, this is not purely Aristotelian, not purely Platonian. It has elements from Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, and Stoics, etc., whatever. A kind of synthesis, but basically based on the ancient Greek wisdom. And they call it falsafa, or falasife, ahl falasife. This term is a bit misleading because when people read the text, they think only this tradition is a philosophical tradition because it's falsafa and philosophy. Philosophy are the direct translation of the Greek term. But this is misleading because Kalam is, for me, also a philosophical tradition. Though people usually translate it as an Islamic theology or Arabic scholasticism, it may mislead some people because theology, if you take, faith-seeking understanding, this is not exactly Kalam. It is not even just about God. It is much more comprehensive and philosophical in its roots because Kalam doesn't take anything for granted, like the existence of God. It tries to give some arguments to justify the existence of God. And not just talk about God, but talks about ontology, ethics, politics, many other different issues. So I consider Kalam as a philosophical strand, not a theological strand. Though it has some elements from ancient Greek wisdom, but not based on ancient Greek wisdom as philosophy is based. And several significant schools within the Kalam is Ash'arites, Maturidis, and Mu'tazila, though Mu'tazila is a bit opposition to the other two. Now, let's look at the basic thesis of these two traditions. Ibn Sina holds, in addition to substantial dualism, the world is emanated from God. This is a necessary process, okay? Eternal and necessary process. God, what we call it, does not create it out of nothing. It's just emanated necessarily. Why it's necessary? Because it cannot be otherwise. There is only one option, and it is that option. And this is the best option. I mean, the idea of the best possible world, Nizam al-Hayr, is already here, presented before Leibniz. But this is even necessary. Leibniz has some kind of, God chooses whatever. However, in this order, logical, metaphysical impossibilities cannot be realized. Ibn Sina doesn't accept this, the possibility of, for example, violating the principle of non-contradiction. However, since it is necessary, what we call the contingent phenomena, like it's raining, it's shiny. These are necessary events, given the earlier events. On the other hand, in Kalam, there is no necessitarian ontology. God has certain will. He freely chooses between options and creates a certain option out of nothing, if you will. And here, Ash'arites and Maturidists hold occasionalism. Though Mu'tazile is closer to occasionalism, but not explicitly occasionalist. I don't know whether you are familiar with this term, but this is a very significant term to understand Kalam, also the early modern philosophy, because not just the Kalam people, also the significant philosophers in the 17th century follow occasionalism, like Cordimo, Malebranche, etc. In an occasionalist framework, God creates everything, and there is no secondary causality. Okay? For example, if I hit this, and I think I hit this, I expose some causal power on this object. This is just an illusion. When I move my hand, God creates it, and on the basis of this move, God creates also the movement of this pencil. So there is no real causality between two finite phenomena. God is the real cause behind all these phenomena. But God doesn't act arbitrarily. This is the crucial point, because some people may think God can create whatever he wishes. Though logically possible, God may create whatever he wishes, and this is how they explain the possibility of miracles. God does not act arbitrarily in the usual sense. He follows certain orders, and they call it ade or sunnah. God follows certain habits in creating. So God creates the burning of cotton when he creates fire nearby, not water. Okay? There is a certain order of creation here. Now, let's get started with the dualist ontology. Having a computer program, let's assume that it's a bodily accident. And if consciousness is not a bodily accident, now I am looking at the first possibility. It cannot inhere in a body because it's mental, and mental properties can inhere only in mental substances, not bodily substances, because there is a substantial gap between them. A body may become conscious only if God put it in a mind. A bodily accident cannot gradually transform into a mental accident because there would be a category change, which is unacceptable to dualist theories. Mental properties can inhere only in mental substances or souls. So a machine can think if God puts it in a soul, and this is logically possible. God can put a soul into a machine. There is no logical, metaphysical contradiction in that. And this is how a dualist can claim that a machine can think or have a consciousness. However, given the necessitarian emanationism and the best possible world assumption, it is not clear whether God's plan for the world includes thinking machines. If it includes, thinking machines must exist sometime, even if it is not now. If not, they could not exist anytime. Okay, we don't know God's plan. If it is included in God's plan, it will happen one way or another in the future. Let's take the second option. If consciousness is purely computational and a bodily accident, then it can inhere in a body. So computers, being computer per se, can have consciousness. It's logically possible. Maybe you notice here the difference between a machine and a computer, or not? Did you notice? I mean, when I use the term computer, I specifically refer to a machine, which is a sophisticated kind of machine that runs a certain type of program, okay? And this is what is a computer. Even, you can build a very basic machine which doesn't have any program. God can put a soul even into that basic machine, But when we are talking about computer, we have in mind a certain program, a computational software. And the question is whether this computational software per se can give rise to mental phenomena. Given the necessitarian emanationism and the best possible world assumption, it is not clear whether God's plan for the world includes thinking machines. If it includes, thinking machines must exist sometime. If not, they could not exist any time again. Even if this is logically possible within this framework, still it depends on God's choice, whether he put it into the order in his mind, or knowledge, whatever. Let's now look at atomist theories. Again, I assume having a computer program is a bodily accident. The first option here, consciousness is not a bodily accident. Let's assume that. Then it can still inhere in bodies because in atomist ontologies, any property inheres in atoms and bodies. There is no problem about that. All kinds of accidents inhere in bodies and atoms. So machines can have consciousness if God creates that accident in them. This is logically possible in this framework. But the question is, can computers, being computer per se, have consciousness? Not just the machines, a specific kind of machine that runs a certain specific type of program. Via this program can become, whether it can become conscious or not. If consciousness is purely computational, this is the first option, then there is no categorical gap between these two accidents, consciousness and computer program. Then yes, the answer to this question is yes, it's logically possible. And it's, whether it's naturally possible, I think it's likely, also naturally possible, because it will be a higher and much complex degree of the current computational level. It may just take some time to reach that level. Okay, I'm just wrapping up. Again, the same question. If consciousness is not purely computational, as Searle would defend it, then there will be a categorical gap between these two accidents. However, an accident within a certain logical category cannot transform into an accident that is within a totally distinct logical category. So no, the answer to this question is no. God must put consciousness separately into that machine so that the machine becomes conscious. But in this option, the machine becomes conscious not just because it is a computer. Do you see the difference here? Is this logically possible or naturally possible? Natural possibility here means, is it within divine habit of creation? And there is no indication for that, because the only indication we have is that God put consciousness only into biological organisms. This is what we have observed so far. So given our current level of knowledge, I say it is not likely. So, to sum up, whether machines can have consciousness or not, you can approach this question from many different angles, and I would like to show two important angles here from two different ontologies. And this is not even enough. One ontology cannot give a definite answer because you have to make several further assumptions. And for each several assumption, what is the conclusion? I try to eliminate it. And this is quite a complex question, I think, and depends on your initial assumptions to analyze. Thank you very much.
Cambridge Muslim College, training the next generation of Muslim thinkers.